Morning, everyone. Welcome to our March webinar. I'm just going to give it a few moments just to let people join. I can see that the numbers there of people joining is going up. So I'll give it a few moments just to allow people to join before Paul and I start. Okay, I can see those numbers there have sort of, climbed up. So we'll make a start because we've got a lot to get through today. So as I said, welcome to our March webinar, although looking at the weather, it feels more like November. As our regular listeners will know, through our webinars, we like to bring you different topics, not just legal related ones, but perhaps areas that maybe you're curious about as an HR professional, perhaps things that you're thinking about as a business. And so we saw last month, we brought you a discussion with Billy Moss of Beaufort about financial well-being. And this month, I'm really pleased to be joined by our family partner, our new family partner and head of our family law group, and that's Paul Linsell. So thank you, Paul, and welcome.
Thanks, Emma. Good morning, everyone. Delighted to be here. Looking forward to discussing this important topic.
No, absolutely. And what I want today to be is really a deeper dive into this area, which, as I said, those of you who've listened to our webinars before have heard me sort of talk about. And this is this idea of knowing our people and knowing our teams. It's really about having sort of a deeper dive conversation about that and how those outside influences can impact or may impact at work and how employers can support their people. And I think it's really important to think about, however invested we are in our careers, we're not immune to things that happen outside of work. And also how we can, bring things outside of work into the workplace and also vice versa. And sometimes, things do go wrong outside of work. And it's really important, I think, to discuss in topics like this and in webinars like this, how managers and our leaders can be more aware and how they can be more supportive. Just a bit of housekeeping just before we start. As you can see, Paul and I are live this morning. The webinar will be recorded, so I will be sending out a recording link. So welcome to all of you who are listening again. If you want to catch up with our previous webinars, then please do check out either our website or our YouTube channel, and you can find all our previous webinars there. If you want to raise any questions or join the discussion, then please do use the chat function, which you should be able to find at the bottom of your screen, and we will endeavour to deal with any questions. If any of them are very specific, then Paul's happy to take those offline. As ever, this is a general discussion and a general overview. So if you do have any specific questions or queries, then please do reach out to Paul or myself, and I'll be sending out our contact details later. And for those who don't know Boyce Turner, well, we are a law firm based in the Thames Valley. We offer not only commercial support and advice, but also private client support and advice as well through our wealth protection teams, our clinical negligence PI teams, and also our family teams as well. So Paul, do you want to just give us a little bit of a snapshot about the types of work that you're doing in the family team?
Yeah, of course. So, essentially, as Emma was saying, I sit as the head of the family team, which is within a wider private client service. So we pretty much do everything full service for individuals, as well as the business side of things as well. Specifically within family law, my focus predominantly is on helping people when they are experiencing something challenging in their home life. So predominantly relationship breakdown scenarios, whether that be divorce or unmarried couples. I'm also doing much more work helping people with proactive agreements. So things like prenuptial agreements, postnuptial agreements, cohabitation agreements, trying to set things up so that they ideally don't run into those difficulties that can cause real problems if they do unfortunately suffer a relationship breakdown. So it's predominantly focused on those areas and the various strands of law that can kind of come in through that, whether it's to do with children issues, finances, domestic abuse situations, or general divorce law itself.
Brilliant. And we'll pick up on some of those topics as well when we go through our discussion. So to today, and what Paul and I are going to talk about, and really it's looking at not about creating a better work-life balance, although that may be one of the solutions that employers come up with, but really it's to focus on when those external issues spill over into the workplace and what this might mean for your people, but also what that might mean for your business as well. So looking at the challenges and the impact. So Paul, when we think about home life and the challenges there, what sorts of issues are we thinking about?
It can be all sorts of things. I mean, I think generally the work that I deal with is predominantly focused around relationship issues, so relationship breakdown, which is a very serious issue. And I think, as you'll be able to see on the slide there, it's a major life event for people. I think there's some interesting research about what that means and how that impacts people. And again, as you'll see, there's actual scales of stress and sort of life events that can cause stress. And obviously, death of a spouse or partner is considered to be the most stressful event that anyone can go through. But interestingly, relationship breakdown is considered to be the second most stressful event that someone can go through. So it's a really big thing, actually. It's a really big deal for people that are experiencing this. And I think it's important to acknowledge that that's going to really impact every element of their life. And it's going to obviously be a significant life event for them. And again, sort of seeing on the slide there, it's seeing that there are other stressful events, of course, and people will be in tune with those. And I think many businesses and managers will have various policies. So things like, if a relative dies, there'll be bereavement policies. If there's injury or illness, there's all those sort of policies in place. There's some other ones on the slide there about sort of stressful events, things like being sent to prison. I'm not sure many employers are going to be too concerned so much with that, because obviously their employment situation is going to change as a result. But it's really just making the point, I suppose, that this is something that I come across regularly in the work that I do, and I see people in these situations, and it's a very difficult situation for them to face. And I think particularly with relationship breakdown, because for many there is still a stigma attached to it as well. I think they still find that actually dealing with this or discussing it with their managers or their employers can be quite difficult. So again, it's not always the easiest one to handle. Whereas I think generally as a society, we're quite used to, in some ways, and sort of knowing what to do if someone suffers a bereavement. There's a sort of default mode that most people will go into. Whereas if someone's going through a relationship breakdown, it can sometimes be a bit of a not quite sure how to handle that. So hopefully throughout the discussion today, we'll kind of explore that a bit more, and how to handle that and what to sort of think about when that's arising. Yeah,
and I think sometimes is that, when we think about these situations and the relationship breakdown, we think about often the two people that are involved. But I think, the sort of the ripples, the ripple effect. So it may not just be that it is, one of the couple that is experiencing difficulties. It might actually be another member of the family as well. For example, a grandparent. And so I think it's worth, also thinking about, it's not just the impact on the couple and their employment, but also, as I said, that sort of ripple effect as well. So having that awareness and that appreciation as well, I think is really important.
That's absolutely right. I think another big area is a lot more research is being conducted recently about grown-up children, and And there's an increasing trend actually of people getting divorced later in life when their children are adults. And so it might actually be that you've got effectively a child, although obviously a grown-up child, who is the employee, and it's their parents that are going through a divorce, and the impact on them as a result of that can be huge, because it can, in some circumstances, undermine their childhood, and so they can suddenly suffer this almost loss of identity. But you're right, it can ripple throughout all sorts of generations within the same family, wider family, friends, colleagues. It can really have quite a big impact for all around.
Yeah, no, and I think, you know, when we think about the relationship breakdown, I know, Paul, you've got some really interesting statistics here. I mean, we've also got the divorce rate there. And I found one that, you know, the average age of marriage is about 12 and a half years, and yeah, as you've got the divorce rate is, you know, 42 to 52%. One thing that is very interesting that I want to look at is the ages, for men and for women. So often, it's a terrible phrase, but often you hear about you know, people within that age group as in the engine room of their careers. So they're the people who are, you know, perhaps, you know, the high flyers, or they're the managers, they're the leaders, they're more senior in an organization. So at a point where they are perhaps in that leadership role, and, you know, a mentoring role, and a role where they are, you know, developing and managing and leading their teams, underneath, perhaps things are not going so well. And again, that can not only have an effect on the individual, but their teams as well in the leadership that they're given. I wonder if you've got any thoughts on
yeah,
that.
I think that's absolutely right. I think, I mean, the reality is that it's a common problem generally in society. I mean, again, statistics, as you say, are, depending on how you calculate it, quite varied, but generally a sort of 1 in 2 marriages breaking down, and even more unmarried couples facing relationship breakdown. It is a sort of widespread problem. And then again, the most common age for that to be a problem is exactly what you've just described. It's people that are often at the height of their career. So it can affect anyone at any stage.
Yes.
But predominantly it does impact people in that sort of key window of their career. Now, I suppose there's possibly a causation of what they're doing in their career that might be one of the reasons for that relationship breakdown. And we'll come on to that perhaps a little bit later, as to being aware of that and the impacts of work life on home life.
Yes.
With the reverse of this. But no, absolutely, it is often people in these kind of roles that are experiencing this. And there's, again, some recent studies that have been done that I think it was about 69% of people in senior leadership roles had experienced or are experiencing relationship breakdown, which is a phenomenal number. I mean, I think if everyone thinks about their businesses and thinks about the people in those senior roles, I mean, effectively 7 in 10 have already experienced it, or are in the sort of throes of experiencing it, which is a massive problem for businesses. Because I think you're right. Again, if you've got someone in that role who is supposed to be a mentor or a leader, or really sort of driving a team forward, if they aren't able to perform, if they are suffering in their personal life because of all these things that are going on, well, what impact is that going to have on the wider team? And therefore, extrapolating that out on the entire business, it can be huge.
Well, let's have a look at some of those some of those issues and some of the sort of impact it can have. And, you know, yes, it does make for slightly grim reading, but also what's interesting is these are the sorts of issues that we see, you know, on our side of the desk, when we think about the employment, you know, employment conflicts, when we think about absence, particularly with, you know, sort of, you know, stress and anxiety. It's interesting about the conflict at work and how that could perhaps spill over at work as well, particularly when somebody's very highly emotionally charged. But sometimes, you know, we get situations, and I'm sure you've had situations, Paul, where if you like, the issue is at work, because it's perhaps, you know, sometimes a couple that are in a relationship that's broken down and they both work for the same employer. it might also be that the sort of the third party in the relationship works for the employer. So there are some very difficult situations there that employers might find themselves in. I don't know whether you've got any kind of, sort of experiences of that and how that might impact.
It's absolutely right. And I think as you say, the conflict spilling over into work is sadly quite common. And again, the experiences that I have, as you say, that could be either a direct link within the employment structure. So whether it's the two parties that are separating are both employed, and therefore it's managing the fallout, which quite often people within a work setting are, for want of a better word, taking sides or whatever it might be. Or as you say, there might be a third party involved within the work setting. But there's also a broader spilling over into work. I've seen situations where someone has gone to the spouse's or their soon-to-be ex-spouse's employer and caused a scene. There's been examples where they might be trying to damage that person publicly. So they might be laying bare all of the sort of dirty laundry that's from their relationship in a sort of work setting.
And online as well.
And online, absolutely. So these things very often will cause quite a bit of conflict, and obviously people are emotionally charged. They don't necessarily make their best choices in those situations. And it does happen. I've had clients where we've had to effectively cross over into employment issues because their ex has been coming in and causing problems. And that could be to the extent that they're physically turning up at the office and security are having to get involved and remove them, and it's causing all sorts of difficult issues for both the individual but also for the wider workforce. Or it could be, as you say, sort of damage to reputation, confidentiality issues. So again, the spouse may be aware of something that is confidential to the business, and they start threatening to share that or to expose that or whatever it might be. So it can quite often become a problem for the company as much as the individual that's involved. But another way that conflict can just spill over is that the individual, the employee, can sometimes be experiencing more conflict in their life, and therefore they can be more confrontational, or they're going through a sort of cycle of emotions. Sometimes it might be anger, sometimes it might be sadness, whatever it might be. So again, that can sometimes result in greater conflict. They might get into arguments, they might be more emotionally charged in their employment as well.
I think the mistakes and accidents point is a really interesting one, and that can be caused obviously because and productivity as well, isn't it? If your mind's not on the job because of other things, but also the impact of stress, anxiety, tiredness, all of that can have an impact on your ability, your cognitive thought and reasoning, as you said, your ability to be rational.
I think all of those really are sort of wrapped up in that stress and the both emotional and physical impact of that stress and the strain of the situation.
And I wonder also that point about not being able to control things outside of work. So it's almost you sort of go into ultra control mode at work because that's the only thing that you can actually get a grip on and control.
Yeah, I think people react very differently. Again, we'll look at warning signs and things in a moment. And some people, their reaction to stress is to throw themselves into work even more because that's their kind of safe space. They kind of know, as you say, they can control it. They feel like at least they can kind of move that on. Other people will be unable to sort of handle it. They won't be able to sort of focus. And again, that sort of mistakes and accidents, productivity levels dropping. Again, at the extreme end, absence, whether that's absence for actually dealing with the practical side of things that need to be sorted out. So if there's divorce proceedings or whatever it might be, dealing with that, or it could be, again, that it's sickness caused by stress, whether for them or, again, another thing to think about is children. They may have children that are suddenly having more time off school because the children are impacted by all of this, and they're having to look after the child, or there may be wrangling over the child and who's looking after the child on this day or that day, and suddenly it becomes a much more difficult childcare arrangement. And so again, that can sort of cause absences. So it can be, again, as we were sort of saying earlier, a really difficult, challenging time for people, which is going to have this negative impact on the work life. It's going to cause all of these things that you see on screen. So yeah, it's predominantly the stress and the strain that's going to be resulting in those issues.
And that, as we know, is not always easy for employers to see or to spot. Some people are very good at covering up how they feel, and it is very difficult sometimes for employers to know when it's sort of like the swan, everything's very calm and serene on top, and then below we're sort of frantically paddling. I wonder whether you've got any sort of tips there for managers primarily, in terms of what they can do to be more aware.
I think for managers, it's in some ways the obvious stuff of just knowing your team, and just trying to engage in those conversations, which I think general sort of well-being angle on it, obviously not just exclusively focused on relationships, but their wider life as a whole, and sort of understanding that. I think that's probably the starting point. But in terms of spotting the signs, I think it is really people acting in ways that perhaps they haven't acted in that way before. So again, it may be that they're suddenly spending a lot longer in the office than they would have done previously, and that may be an indication that they simply don't want to be at home because it's not a very nice environment at home. In today's sort of climate, it may be that if you're offering a hybrid work from home or work from the office, suddenly someone's coming into the office a lot more, and you might just want to sort of have a conversation about that and just say, I've noticed this. Is there anything that we can discuss or anything we can do to help? So I think it's just being aware of that. And again, those sorts of stress signs, where people have got things bubbling, and sort of trying to identify that. I think, interestingly, again, going back to some statistics, there are some statistics that suggest that the impact of a divorce or a relationship breakdown is more likely to affect men at work. So I think it was 93% of men said that they felt their ability to work was impacted by their relationship breakdown, which again is a phenomenal number. Essentially, it's almost all men that experience that are impacted at work by their relationship breakdown. The figures for women were still very high. I think they were in the high 70s. But again, there is a clear disparity there. And I think, again, it may be that stereotypically male employees may be less willing to share, maybe less inclined to have those sorts of conversations with men. And so I think, again, it's important to try and break those barriers down, and to get to know your team and to really sort of invest in them, I suppose, and invest in their home life and understanding them as a whole, because actually you can then tackle these things in a much more constructive way.
And I think it's also thinking about those HR processes that we have in place and making sure that managers are using those. So, for example, are we monitoring our absences? Is there a pattern to the absences that people are having? Is it a Friday? Is it a Monday? Is it odd days? What is it? And are we using the opportunity to have those conversations with our staff about, maybe she had a couple of days off, what, can we help? What's going on? And I think that's a really important, metric that we have, which isn't just about, okay, how many sick days are people having off, but let's use it in a more holistic way and in a more sort of supportive way as well.
I think it's a really important point as well, because I think, again, I've had clients where we may have had sort of court hearings or a mediation process coming up or whatever it might be. And they've actually said to me that they don't feel able to take the time off for that. So they're going to go off sick, and they're going to take some time off sick to deal with that sort of hearing, which, I've obviously then gone back to them and said, look, why don't you have a conversation about this? Because you may find that it's a far better and more supportive response than you might be anticipating. But people really worry about this stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
They worry about how it's going to be perceived, and they worry about, are they going to have to suddenly unbundle all of this stuff in a setting where they might want to kind of maintain that work visage of kind of professional image. And so it's tricky. It's tricky for HR managers and other managers to handle that. But again, I think it comes back to what you're just saying about taking that holistic approach with people, really.
Exactly. And I think the other point you sort of picked up on was the remote working and the hybrid working. And I think, it isn't just people coming in more or coming in less or whatever the policy is, but it's actually thinking about how can we avoid people being out of sight and out of mind. And I think it's really important to sort of go back and think about how effectively are we using our check-ins with people. We were all very, very good, weren't we? March 2020 at, the Zoom quizzes and the virtual this and virtual that. But have we all grown tired? And are we still using those, using the technology effectively to have those check-ins with people and using our team meetings and our one-to-ones effectively, not just using, WhatsApps or Teams chats, but are we actually physically seeing people? Because you can tell a lot by appearances. You can tell a lot by the way people are communicating. There are these skills. There are these signs that employers and managers can pick up on if they're just a little bit more aware and moving away from sort of the transactional conversations into having those sort of conversations that we don't like having, the how are you, because you're never quite sure as to what you're going to get back. But it's about having those high trust relationships with your team so that they feel able to avoid us getting to absences and people leaving us. It's all about dealing with those issues earlier, being that sort of proactive manager.
I think, again, it's something where I think myself as a manager of a team, it's something you have to be aware of. And I think particularly with the pandemic, there's a wider, again, stepping away from the relationship breakdown side of things, there's a wider mental health angle generally, where you need to spot signs and you need to support people. And I think there's a growing obligation on a manager to take on that role. And I think it is an important one to take on. And again, it's simple things. It's things like if there's a team meeting and someone's always got their camera off and they're the one forever not really saying much, or they're not really willing to be on a camera screen. Yes, occasionally there's IT issues, or there may be a reason why that might happen every now and again. But if there's a pattern there, it's just checking in. It's just checking in with someone. Because again, it's about adding value to the employee, making them feel that you care. And as you say, making sure that they don't have those absences, don't leave roles. Because again, bringing it back to relationship breakdown, people leaving after a relationship breakdown in employment statistics are huge. I think it's something like 1 in 10 will change employment within the year after a divorce, which again is quite a big number, and that number actually increases if those people feel that they weren't supported by their employer. So again, it's something that people need to be thinking about how they can help their staff and their teams.
So let's think about that. Let's think about some of the ways that employers might help. And again, thinking about the situations that you've been involved with, if you could create your perfect employer, what would you like to see?
Well, I think, again, it's if someone's going through, and again, using the example of relationship breakdown, but I think this probably applies to pretty much any of the challenges that someone might be facing in their home life. It's kind of, what should an employer be doing? What can they do to help? Because I think naturally some employers will want to fix it and to solve it, both for genuine sort of human reasons, but also to get that person functioning back as an effective employee. Now, what I think they can do, again, sort of on the screen here with the slide, I think empathy is a huge one. I think very often people just want to be heard, and they just want people to acknowledge that this is difficult and that they are facing a challenge, that they are essentially coping with that, and that there is support there, and to be empathetic towards them. I mean, at the end of the day, I think, again, with relationship breakdown, it can be a difficult one because some people will naturally be very private, and so they won't want to share all of that. But I think the manager can still be empathetic with that and just sort of say that I'm here if you want to talk about it more, but appreciate that you may not want to bring this into this environment. Entirely your choice, and we'll respect whichever way you sort of go with that. But again, just demonstrating empathy for the situation and sort of understanding what they might be going through, which I think then sort of comes on to some of those other points about, okay, well, how can that go further? I think signposting is a huge one. I think signposting people to support, professional support that can assist them, is really important. So again, it's not that managers and HR managers or team managers are expected to know, okay, this is what you need to do and to fix it for them, but just to be able to say, look, I can see this is really hard. Why don't you go and speak to these people, whoever it may be? Now, that could be a solicitor, such as myself. It could be a mediator. It could be, there are specific divorce coaches out there. It could be therapeutic support. So there are all sorts of different people that can really help guide people and perhaps are more trained, if you like, in dealing with these situations. So again, sort of signposting them and trying to signpost them very early as well, because I think, again, the longer things go, the more entrenched things become, the harder it becomes. I think generally my advice to anyone, if I speak to anyone who is experiencing some sort of relationship breakdown issue or family life issue, is get the support as early as you can, get the advice as early as you can, because often that clarity, that understanding of what's going on, and a bit more certainty in what is usually a very difficult and uncertain time, can really lift them out of that risk factor of falling into depression, anxiety disorders, or all these other things that can be then much more long lasting as an issue. So I think that's a really big one. I think, again, the other thing flowing from the empathy is the sort of flexibility with the work and the time off, and just really being upfront with that. And there can be specific policies put in place to deal with these situations as to what people can and can't do, a bit like a bereavement policy, sort of criteria around that, but also just being a bit more thoughtful than that, and rather than just, okay, you can have some time off to go and deal with your court hearings or mediation or process or whatever you actually physically need to do, but also saying, well, okay, we've got this project or whatever it might be coming up, that's going to be a real high pressure project. Perhaps we could look at you sharing that with someone else, or maybe even coming off that project and dealing with a different project a bit later down the line, just to sort of ease some of that pressure. Because again, I think people generally will have a lot going on. I mean, if you're going through a divorce, you're dealing with huge amounts of stuff, as well as all the emotional turmoil, the actual amount of practical stuff that you're having to address. I mean, most people listening may well have experienced the sort of buying and selling a house. Well, that pretty much, not always, but very commonly will happen when you're going through a divorce. So you've got all of that stress and sort of fear, as well as not knowing what that's going to look like. You don't know what your next house is going to be, but you're also sorting out the wider finances. You might be dealing with either that person's moved out already, or you're going to be moving out. You've got to sort out childcare arrangements. That's all suddenly new. It might be changing of schools for children. There's just so much going on. And so I think, again, trying to take off some of the work pressure and the work stress, being realistic with it. Obviously, there is still a role that needs to be performed, but trying to really adjust that as best as possible to allow them to have some time to deal with that kind of life admin, which is suddenly at this massively elevated sort of stage. I think it's another thing that can really help people and really help them progress things more quickly. Again, other things that they can do, and sort of mentioning about confidentiality, I think going back to that empathy point of people fearing discussing this, and fearing that if suddenly they discuss with a manager or whoever it might be, that suddenly it's going to be shared widely across the firm, and everyone will know. I think reassuring them that this is a private conversation. This is something that not everyone needs to know. Discussing with them what they're perhaps comfortable with people knowing, and again, encouraging them to seek support from not just sort of top-down management, but colleagues and most likely friends that they work with as well. So I think that's, again, an important point for people, is ensuring we know it's confidential. Supporting family life, I mean, that's probably more of a proactive step, if you like. And again, just being cautious that you're not putting too much on your employees at the outset that is then causing the issues in their family life. So sort of late working hours, unsociable working hours, or having to work at home, or having to do more and more, or again, policies.
Also, practical things are around uncertainty. So if you've got people who work shifts, you know, how much notice are you giving people of their shifts, of their working patterns? You know, how much planning time are you allowing for people? Again, or sometimes it's the work uncertainties as well can create, you know, that sort of, again, it's the reverse impact, isn't it? How is work impacting?
Well, it's both. I mean, shift work's a really big one, actually. I think people that work shifts, again, the statistics suggest they are more likely to experience relationship breakdown, presumably because their life is set up in a way that often is less conducive to a sort of stable family life. But it's also something I deal with a lot. So, for example, trying to sort out the arrangements for children, and you've got sometimes one or even both parties, both parents who work shifts, trying to match all of that together is quite complex around everything the child may be doing. I mean, depending on the age of the child, they might be going to all sorts of sporting clubs or social clubs or whatever it might be as well. And I think the point that you just made there about them not knowing and that uncertainty, that can cause so much stress, but it can also cause a real difficulty for the legal advisors, because if you've got a situation where, okay, we're trying to agree the arrangements for a child, and it's going to be best for that child to have some sort of certainty, so they know they're at mum's on this date and dad's on that date and so on, and they can plan and sort of build their life around it. If you're presented with a situation where both employers are saying, well, we're only going to tell you your shift patterns a week in advance or a month in advance or whatever it is, it's almost impossible.
Or it's your weekend with the child, and then all of a sudden, you know, the rug's pulled and you've got to work. And, you know, again, that point about the impact on the child or the children is, you know, really, really.
Yeah, and it's an ongoing problem for some people. And I mean, again, if you think about going back to what we were saying before about people leaving, if you have people in that situation and they've got a child who's like 6, and they're trying to juggle schooling, they're trying to juggle their shift work and all this kind of thing, very often people may get to the point where they say, I need more certainty in my employment hours, and therefore I'm going to leave. Which, had there been a conversation, had there been some sort of exploration of that, that potentially could have been avoided. And again, the early you sort of tackle it, the early sort of, if you've got people coming to you saying, I'm experiencing this relationship breakdown, and if they are known to have children, it may be a conversation you can have. So again, sort of saying, okay, look, not just taking the pressure off in sort of workloads and things, but actually how can we manage this to provide you with more certainty? Because any certainty that you can give someone in that situation, it will pay massive dividends, because they will be so grateful to have some certainty in their life, that the rewards of that, and the sort of flip side of supporting someone through that sort of process, is you're likely to have a very loyal and committed employee. And if you've managed to sort of adjust their work life to fit their home life, I think you could be having a very productive, very good employee going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's also about showing them respect as well for that they're not just an employee, a number, a worker. You know, they've got a life outside that also we have to respect as well. So I think the point you make there about employers, you know, it's not about them solving the issue, but there are sort of small steps you can take. That might just be, as you said, having that high trust relationship, having that ability to have those conversations with your people, or it might be more than that. It might be signposting. And I think, there isn't that sort of one size fits all approach. And for some of you listening, this might be the first time that you've ever thought about it. And I think the fact that you're actually on this webinar listening to us discussing this is a really important step to actually thinking about, oh yeah, all these other issues that we'd never thought about. So why? One of my big questions is why should employers do this? And I know we've sort of touched a little bit about it, but I think it is important to think about why employers might choose to offer support to their people. And we've got some really interesting stats here, haven't we, Paul?
Yeah, I think it's, hopefully reasonably obvious as to why. Sort of going back to what I just said then about people, if you get this right, not only do you minimize the impact for the employee potentially, but you also maximize the potential that they're going to be actually really grateful and really committed to the company and a real strong employee and a good advocate for the business.
Well, absolutely. Our best salespeople for us as an organization are our employees. So absolutely, I think it's,
Yeah, and I think again it's one of those things where the sort of great resignation that's been touted recently, that if there's people doing this out there in terms of recruitment, saying, well, actually, yeah, my employer really does care, and this is how they showed that, this is how they supported me, and I was doing really tough things in a really tough time, but they helped me through that. That can be really powerful. And I think going back to the slide, it's something which the reality is very few are doing. Again, statistics here which were conducted by Resolution, which is a big family law organisation, a national family law organisation that most family lawyers and family practitioners subscribe to. They've done some research, and only 10% of people that have gone through a relationship breakdown felt that their employers offered adequate support, not even good support, but adequate support. And again, 34% were saying that actually more needs to be done in the workplace in this scenario. So it's something that employers can benefit from. I think ultimately they can get benefit themselves, they can benefit their people, and the impacts of that can be massive. All those things that we saw as risk factors and the sort of problems, so absence, loss of staff, and all those kind of things, they can all be massively tempered if you get this right. But also you'll see other benefits, again, salespeople for your teams and so on. Just wanted to touch on mediation very quickly.
I do.
Wow.
Yes.
So I think that's something that I suppose, going back to what I was saying before, I think really the big 2 points that I want people listening to this to take away, if they can, are don't be afraid to have these conversations with people, because I think it generally will go well. I know it can be difficult, but don't be afraid of it. But the second big thing is to signpost, and to signpost appropriately. And I think mediation is sometimes a good signpost to give to people, because mediation as a process is where people try and resolve their disputes as a result of the relationship breakdown, sort out whatever they need to sort out in a much more effective and constructive way. Now, for the business, the benefit of that is it's much quicker. It's also generally less damaging to the individuals involved. So again, getting that productive employee back both more quickly and hopefully with less damage done to them, if you like, it's more likely to happen. So if you can get people into mediation, again, in a relationship breakdown situation, that's the sort of gold standard, if you like, for trying to resolve things. And to give some sort of comparison on that in terms of timeframes, mediation, you may resolve things in a mediation in sort of 3 to 6 months. They may be through resolving all the stuff. Now, that's not to say they'll resolve all the emotional side of their relationship breakdown. Of course, that can take many, many years, if ever. Some people carry that with them for life. But certainly the practical and the sort of really high stress, life-changing circumstances in mediation, sort of 3 to 6 months is the average, I would say, to get those sorts of things sorted out. And if you compare that to a court process, even if a court application was issued today, in relation to, say, finances or a divorce, you're probably looking at 18 months from today. So the actual issue of that application to it being fully resolved. So massively different time frame. And I think, again, looking at it from the business point of view, this person might be in this kind of high stress, uncertain situation for 6 months compared to it'd be more than 18 months because they'd have been dealing with some things before they actually get to the core application. So probably 2 years. And that can be massive in terms of productivity and actually output, useful output from the employee.
No, and interesting there what you say about your court, your length of time to get to court. I mean, we've got similar sort of timeframes in the employment tribunal system as well. So it's it's an interesting one. And Paul and I did want to talk about domestic abuse situations, and I'd also sort of include in that sort of forced marriage and honour-based abuse as well. We can't do it justice in one slide, but we couldn't talk about home life and work life without mentioning it. And certainly, we're very much aware, aren't we, with the stories that we've heard in the news, and people being at home with lockdowns and restrictions. For many, home is not the best place for them, and it's not the safest place for them or their children. And I think that, again, when we think about what we're doing in terms of, are we fully remote? Are we hybrid? Where are we asking our people to work? How are we asking our people to work? I think employers do need to be incredibly mindful about the safety of home for many. There are many organisations that can help, and certainly if people want to find out more, then please do get in touch with Paul and myself. But really just to sort of flag that this is part of the overall discussion, but it is more than just, a slide. It is something that, we would run a specific session on. And if it is something that you want to hear more about, then we will do so. But certainly it's about having that awareness, having that support in place, and having those relationships within your organisation where people can talk, and also being very aware at spotting the signs, as well as being very aware that working from home for some is not going to be the best place for them to be. So maybe think about having those channels of communication, perhaps some sort of, signposting to charities and other organisations, or indeed, the authorities as well. So we are talking about it. But as I said, it's something that it's more than just a slide. So if you want to hear more or find out more about how you can help, then again, please do get in touch. We've talked about, haven't we, the reasons why we think that employers should do this, and certainly the statistics show, don't they, that employers that are engaged with thinking about these issues, offering support to their organisations, they see better results in terms of maintaining employees and retaining them within the business. And you're absolutely right, Paul. There are many sectors that are struggling to find people and to retain people, and so this is just another useful tool that employers can have in their toolbox to show that they care. And a lot of the things that we've talked about, it's not groundbreaking. It's not about spending lots of money. It's actually about looking at ourselves as leaders and what we can do to support. These aren't expensive, whizzy things that we're sort of suggesting employers to do, are they?
No, I think it is, at its most basic, pretty straightforward. It's about being sort of human, ultimately, and treating your employees as being human, and supporting them in that way. And I think, again, sort of myself as a leader, as well as in the work that I do, I often think it's about taking a holistic approach. You can't just sort of treat someone as a machine and they come into work, or equally, I can't treat someone who comes to me as a client as this is a legal problem to be solved. you've got to delve a little deeper. You've got to kind of open up the bonnet and see what's going on underneath to really help them and get the best out of them.
Would you say that's your approach to these situations as a lawyer as well?
Absolutely. I think I'm very much someone who, we of course use the law, and that's ultimately what I'm trained in and what I do. But very often the sort of things that I'm dealing with aren't just legal issues, and very rarely are they just legal issues. There's so much more going on. So we have to take a holistic approach. Very much my team and the work that we do, that's always the way that we deal with things. We're not going to just push someone into a course of action because this is the right legal answer. We will look at that much more broadly and say, okay, well, what are you actually trying to achieve? What's important to you? And actually getting the best financial settlement or whatever it might be. That may be the most important thing, in which case we'll assist them with that. But if it's a case of, well, you can have an extra £10,000 or you can have a reasonably good working relationship with your ex who you've got to co-parent with going forward, we'll be thinking about that and thinking about it in a much more rounded way. We'll also be signposting. Something I do a lot of is signpost and work collaboratively with other professionals. So whether it's, again, a sort of divorce coach, an IFA, therapeutic support, accountant, whoever it may be, other lawyers, we will always take that kind of team approach, build the right team around the individual to get them from A to B in the best possible way. So that's, I think that's, to me, it's the only approach that you can really take. And certainly that's the way that we do it.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for sharing that with us as well. And I suppose just, some final thoughts before we sort of bring our broadcast to a close. I think that, it's inevitable that home will impact work and work will impact home. And, life isn't static, is it? If you think about our own lives, we grow, we might start a family, meet someone else, move house. But also, thinking about as we grow older, thinking about our relatives as well, and maybe having to think about, caring for elderly relatives as well, and what that might mean in terms of, powers of attorney or wills and wealth protection. So I really hope that the discussion that Paul and I have had today have given you something to think about. And if you want to hear more about what Paul is doing in his team, but how perhaps the work that Paul's doing and the services that he's offering could maybe help support your people as well, particularly around the sort of signposting point, then please do get in touch. It'd be great to hear from you with your comments as well about the webinar as well, and you will receive a feedback form, so it'd be really great if you could complete that as well, just to give us some feedback and also some ideas about what you would like to hear about in our monthly webinar program. So next month, Chris Harbour and I, who's our head of immigration, we're going to be running a webinar focusing on some of those immigration and employment legislative changes. So do join us for that, and look out for invites that are coming through. So that really leaves me to thank Paul for his time today and sharing his really valuable insights into how employers can support people at these very highly charged and emotional times. So thank you, Paul, so much.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for listening. As you say, if anyone's got any questions or wants to know any more, then by all means get in touch.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Many thanks.